Hi friends! Today we're talking about preparing for kidding, specifically what I have in my kidding bucket and what I like to have on hand in case of an emergency. This episode will give you a great place to start getting your supplies together for kidding, as well as some ideas to put on your list to have around when things don't go as planned. Let's get to it. Hey friends, welcome to the Get Goatwise podcast. Are you longing to raise goats and other animals for food but don't know where to start? Do you want to be more self-sufficient and less dependent on the grocery store? Do you wish you had a mentor to walk you through raising livestock? Hi, I'm Millie, animal scientist, cattle girl turned goat rancher, co-owner of Dry Creek Livestock, and simple living enthusiast. For 15 years, I've been on a mission to raise all of our own meat, eggs, and dairy. Here, we'll talk about raising goats and other homestead livestock, how to create sustainable animal management systems that actually work, and a bit of off-grid life with kids and livestock. If you're ready to take control of your food supply, raise livestock with confidence, and provide your family with the most nourishing meat, eggs, and dairy available, you're in the right place. Kick off your muck boots, pour a cup of coffee, and let's talk livestock. Hey there! Do you want to hang out with like-minded folks who are also interested in raising their own livestock and seeking self-sufficiency? Inside the free Raising Goats and Homestead Livestock community, you'll get tips on raising goats and other livestock and ideas to increase your self-sufficiency. Join now at bit.ly/getgoatwisecommunity. You can also become an insider and get weekly emails from me with the latest podcast episode, stories from the ranch, tips on raising goats and other livestock, real-life information about self-sufficiency and living off-grid, and early bird access to special offers. Sign up at www.getgoatwise.com/insider. Before we get started on today's topic, I want to read a review titled Responsible Planning. From Minnesota writes, "We're considering adding goats to our small homestead, and this podcast is teaching me so much about how to plan any new moves on the homestead, not just goats, responsibly. I'm recommending this to everyone. Thank you." Thanks for the review, and thanks for sharing the podcast. I love hearing from you, so if you'd like to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, scroll down to Ratings and Reviews, click on the purple words that say Write a Review, then give me stars and tell me what you think. It makes my day to hear how this show is helping you. So what's happening on the ranch? This last week has been a blur. Stacy got called for jury duty, so he did his civic duty all week. It ended up being a good week to sit in a courtroom since the weather would have shut down his fencing work anyway. But anytime one of us is away, we realize how much they do around here. It really does take all of us to make this place run smoothly. Ray tagged in his 4-H steer. That's when they take their steer in and lead it across the scale, and they put an official tag in its ear. Basically, he's declaring the steer he'll be showing at fair. Sage was kind enough to take him to tag in because we were off selling goats, and it worked out really well. He's been working with his steer every day, so we got him on the scale just fine, and it was a good experience for him and the steer. The pigs have arrived. We've been doing this for 11 years now, and once the pigs get here, I know it's spring, so that's always fun. I'll get some pig pictures in this week's newsletter for sure. We're almost ready to ship out the first round of goat meat orders, and there's still time to get in on that if you order by Sunday, April 13th at noon. Go to drycreekheritagemeats.com to order. As we're getting closer to kidding, we're getting serious about downsizing the kid pen this week and getting ready for this year's kids. We'll be making the final selection on 20 to 25 replacement does this week, choosing the next 10 that go to processing, plus a handful more for those phone calls we get when people want a goat. And then we'll load up what's left and take them to sell for the Easter market. Right before Easter is typically a high point in the goat market. I've been watching the market reports, and this year appears to be following the exact same trend. I'll also be going through my kidding bucket and making sure everything in there is prepped and ready. So I thought I'd give you a little tour of my kidding preparations today, and I'll link these items in the show notes. So my kidding box is actually a bucket. Most people have a box, I have a bucket. I use a 3.5-gallon bucket, so it's shorter than a 5-gallon bucket, and I think it's a little bit wider, but that way I can reach everything that's inside. I can even hang some things up on the lip. It works out really well. I don't do a lid. Maybe I should, but I don't. A lot of people use a toolbox that has a hinged lid, and that way, if they need a place to sit, they can close the lid and sit on the box. Also, everything is contained inside the box with the lid, so if the goats tip it over, everything doesn't tumble out. There are quite a few things in my kidding bucket, but only a handful of those things are used at every single kidding, so we'll go over those first. We like to get a weight on every kid when it's born for our records, so one of the first things I use out of the kidding box is a scale and a sling. You put the kid in the sling and it's a hanging scale, kind of like a fish scale, and then we record the weight. The next thing is tags. So I have the tags, the tag marker, and the tagger. I keep enough tags in the box so that we have whatever we need to tag whatever's born next. These are rubber banded together in front and back pairs, and they're stored in a pencil box by color, which indicates breed, and then we replenish what's in that box every day or whenever they get low. The blank tags are also rubber banded together in front-back pairs, and we usually write those out right in the pasture when we're tagging. We also have a spray bottle of Nolvasan, also part of the tagging procedure. We've been doing this since the beginning to prevent joint ill. Now that our kidding is much less intensive and most are born out in the pasture, we probably don't need to do it, but I'd rather overkill a little and avoid a chance of joint ill. Joint ill is septic arthritis, usually in young goats, and it's caused by bacterial infection of the joints, and the bacteria enter from the environment into the bloodstream, usually through the umbilical cord or breaks in the skin. So we spray the tags with Nolvasan to make sure we're not introducing that bacteria into a newborn kid through tagging. I also have a tag cutter along with the tagging stuff sitting in the bottom of the tagging box. Hardly ever use it, but sometimes you'll misplace a tag. It'll be like on a vein or someplace in the ear that's not appropriate or too low, and you'll need to cut it out and put a different tag in. Or sometimes you put the wrong tag in and you have to cut it out. I also have iodine. We spray the navel with iodine or dip it. It depends on the time of year. If we're kidding a lot, I will have a dip set up, but they dehydrate really fast. So a lot of times we just use a spray bottle of iodine. And then I have my record book and a pencil. And in the record book, I record the dam, the date, the time of the birth, how many kids she had, the sex, the description of the kids, their weight, their teat structure, their mouth structure, if it was assisted or unassisted birth, and any other details. So everything goes in that notebook. And honestly, for years, I've been saying, I'm going to make a kidding notebook. But frankly, a plain old steno notebook just works the best. I have all the space to write everything I want for every kidding, and then I go and put that data into the computer later. All right, so that's pretty simple. For those main things, it's the scale and the sling, the tagging stuff, the iodine, and the record book. Now, other things that are in the box, but I only use occasionally, I have a set of hoof trimmers in there. We've talked about this before. We don't trim hooves on does very often, only if they need it. And kidding is one of the easiest times to do it because they're right close by. We have a way to contain them and get a hold of them easily, quickly trim their hooves, and off they go. I also have a box of nitrile gloves and a couple OB sleeves. That's in case we have to intervene and go in and help a kid be born. Also a bottle of super lube for that same instance. I keep a snare in the bucket. It's a length of parachute cord with loops on both ends, and that way if we need to snare a kid's legs, we can reach in there and get the snare on there. It gives us a way to pull, but we can keep our hands out, and that makes more room for the kid to be born. I also have the charity auction forceps. If you get my newsletter, you know all about them, and maybe I need to talk about it on the podcast sometime. But I found some forceps that look more like tongs, but they'll be perfect for when we have a kid presenting head back. If you want me to talk about that more on here, I can do that. I also have paper cups in there, and that is for when we have a doe that we need to milk the colostrum out of or relieve some milk pressure or just make sure she's doing well. Most of the time it's to collect colostrum to tube a baby that maybe isn't doing that great. I also have a bulb syringe in there. I used to use this all the time with the show goats. I don't think I've used it in 2 or 3 years, but it is nice to have if you ever have a breech kid, that, especially breech, that is not breathing right away or has a lot of mucus. You can just suck that right out of their nose. I have a pair of surgical shears, again, just sitting on the bottom of the bucket. I don't use them very often, but I use those when the umbilical cord is really long and the doe or the kid is stepping on what's left of the cord. I'll trim it up a little tighter. And of course, we keep a towel in there in case we need to dry off a kid if it's cold or windy, or if we need to pack a kid in rather than just sliming ourselves, we'll wrap it in a towel to take it in. So really not a lot of really frequently used things, but a lot of things that when you need them, you kind of need them now. Also, prepping for kidding, what I like to have handy in the barn is a feeding tube. That would probably be the most commonly used thing. I have a feeding tube and a 60cc catheter tip syringe in case we need to tube something. You know, these are the types of things that when you need them, you need them. They're not emergent. It's not like an emergency out in the pasture. You'll take the kid in and tube it in there. But if you don't have a feeding tube and you need one, it's a problem. They're a few bucks. I would have a feeding tube on hand all the time. We have the wound clips for entropion eyelids. We don't use those a lot, and they're not really an emergency situation. But again, when you need them, you need them. We also have medications, examples, Bo-C, oxytocin, penicillin, Dex, and we have syringes and needles in a variety of sizes for the different medications. Now, I realize that some of those medications I mentioned are prescription only, so here's where I'll mention that you really need to have a relationship with a veterinarian that treats goats before your goats start kidding, maybe even before you bring your goats home, because finding and building a relationship with a vet that treats goats is not easy. We'll have a whole episode on that soon. I also like to have Probios on hand all the time for digestive issues. That's more likely going to be for the doe than any kids. I keep bottles and nipples on hand. You know, I've told you before that we take triplets off. We take one kid, when a doe has triplets, we take one and make it into a bottle baby. That way they can still be range goats. Not that they're not capable of raising a triplet, but it's really hard when you raise them in a more extensive system like we do. If you're going to have them in a pen in the barn and you can monitor everything that's happening and making sure all 3 kids are getting fed equally, then that's great. Do that. We've done that before. But in our system, twins are optimal, and anything more than that is really hard to keep an eye on. We also have some kid blankets. I kind of hesitate to even mention this. We rarely use them. We even rarely used them when we were kidding in January, because sometimes you create more problems with blankets than not having the blanket. I would say the exception to this is if you have an undersized kid, maybe a premature kid, and they don't have adequate hair and it's cold and windy, you could go ahead and make sure they're dry before you put the blanket on. Then put the blanket on, but you want to take the blanket off during the day and only blanket at night. Like I said, blankets can cause more problems than they can help, so you want to be careful with that. A few other things that we rarely need, but I'm glad we have it when we need it, is a spool of umbilical tape and an OB needle in the case of prolapse. We also have ketone test strips so we can test for ketosis, and dextrose to treat ketosis, and CMPK for milk fever. Again, things that you may never ever use. And in fact, we haven't used any of those 4 things in, 4 or 5 years probably. But when you need them now. You don't have time to order them. So those are the things to put on your list to get in, just have on a shelf at your place in case those situations arise. So I hope this episode helps you prepare your supplies for kidding so that you'll have what you need when you need it. Remember, we did not get everything our first year. Most of the occasional use stuff was purchased after we had a problem and wished we had it. Start with the basics and add things as it makes sense for your farm or homestead. And if you have questions, come on over to the community and start a conversation. That's at bit.ly/GetGoatWiseCommunity. See you next week. Hey there. Thanks for listening today. I'm so glad you're here. If this episode helped you or encouraged you in some way, share the link with your homesteading friends. And if you really want to help me out, click on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. You can connect with me on Instagram or email linked in the show notes, and meet me back here soon for more Get Goat Wise.